that is a very clear experience and example of colorism. Like, it is real. It happens.
When
like,
you're lighter, yeah, people treat you differently.
Like, that's what I think this conversation really needs to center on. Why is it societally that being lighter skinned has very clear material advantages?
Well, okay, in the future.
Oh, far.
A lot of pink today. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Alexis Johnson. I'm a correspondent with Vice News, and I'll also be acting as our moderator for today's panel. We first want to put out the disclaimer that, we've done our best to get you all here today of different ethnicities, different shades, different skin tones to talk about this topic, but we realize we can't represent everybody in this discussion, okay? Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that, as a brown-skinned Black woman moving throughout the world, it's something that I think about a lot. It's something that I hear being discussed a lot, both in real life, online, in the media. Today, we're here to talk about colorism. What is colorism, and how do you define it?
Hi, my name is Koa, and I identify as biracial. I think about colorism as a distinct hierarchy that is anchored in a proximity to whiteness.
Interesting. I think colorism is internalized racism. I'm Calvin West, and I am an American.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Maya. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm Black. So I actually think that colorism existed before racism, and the fact that historically, for example, if you look at Europe or Asia, like serfs, peasants, people who were in the lower classes had to work and toil in the sun, and those who were royalty or aristocrats or whatever tend to be lighter skinned, and so there has historically been a privileging of lighter skin over darker skinned individuals. But I think that with the onset of global white supremacy fueled by European colonialism, 1492 onward, it was then absorbed into racism.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. I identify as Iranian. As someone who's from like an Asian country that wasn't technically colonized, we even have colorism and that idea even without people coming in and telling us that. So it's almost like a preconceived idea that's in our heads.
I'm a mixed race Puerto Rican. And in the Latina community, you can understand it very much as a caste system where there is no shame to address darker skinned people by slurs.
Okay.
There are personal consequences for colorism. There are also systemic consequences. And colorism has implications for public health, beauty, and all sorts of things in society.
Okay. So you said that you feel like it is internalized racism?
The blackest experience any Black person can have is another Black person telling them that they aren't Black. And that is something that happens to lighter-skinned Black people because there's this idea and that I've lived a different life because I'm a lighter skin. And that, to me, is the most anti-Black thing you can do to anybody.
Maya, what are your thoughts on that? Sorry, I saw you had a little bit of a reaction there.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
So I think often when lighter-skinned people talk about experiencing bias from darker-skinned people, I think that my first thought is just like, remember that colorism is an ism. And like when something has that ISM, it means institutional power plus prejudice. Darker-skinned people as a class of people do not have the ability, the institutional power to, for example, put you in prison for longer sentences because of being lighter skinned or, having less access to employment. There's actual statistics where like a darker-skinned person with a master's degree usually has less employment opportunities or is less employable than a lighter-skinned person who has a bachelor's. And it's not to say that like bullying is like, I know that hurts. Like it's like personal sentiment. I know that actually feels bad. But I think that it's important to remember when we're talking about whether racism or colorism or anything that's an ism, that there's an element of institutional power that is added on to the prejudice.
I do feel like when darker-skinned people express their frustration to lighter-skinned people that their lives might be different, harder, I think you sort of have to acknowledge your privilege, or else it's very ignorant. Even though we're both Black.
What specifically does that mean? Like, I've had experiences in my life that have not been great, and I can assume that it's because of the color of my skin, right? We talk about these ideologies, right, which I think we get lost in sometimes, and we have to just bring it back to reality of like, well, let's talk about your situation for a second. How has it affected you specifically? And the answers that you get are, I didn't get an apartment, I didn't get a job, I didn't get that promotion, which happens to everybody, right? They can always talk about somebody else and what's happened in history, but they can't talk about their own lived experiences. And that's important.
I have plenty lived experiences. I mean, we could go from like, for me, I'm in the beauty industry, the beauty world, so I get invited to influencer events, and if I look around and I'm the darkest Black person, there's still a problem there. You know what I mean? That's a perfect example of that. And you might not realize it, but white people, lighter skinned people, they might be more willing to approach you because you are of lighter skin. That's another personal thing that, have you realized that?
Yes, I can acknowledge that may be the thing. Here's the other thing that happens. The other side of that, the other perspective on that is that I've done a lot of things in the acting world. I've missed roles because I'm not dark enough. And there's a lot of Black people who don't know that. They have no idea that your skin tone is actually highly sought out for.
But I feel like that's acting, you know, they're looking to fill a specific role, whereas if you're just applying for a job, you know, a lighter skinned person might get that opportunity over a darker skinned person.
I get so many personal testimonials from young dark-skinned Black girls who are very detailed about how colorism affects their life. So obviously colorism is a systemic issue, but I think an important part of it is the personal battle like young Black girls endure. These girls are being bullied. Some are as young as 14, 13 years old, having really like mental health crises in middle school. Like, there's also so much research about how colorism shows up like systemically. Like, there's research on public health and the different health outcomes darker skinned Black people have as opposed to lighter skinned Black people. And there's one about pulse oximeters like being used during COVID and how the devices have a harder time registering darker skin. And you can imagine the implications for that. And we know that the Black community has been disproportionately affected by COVID in terms of like deaths. I don't think that evidence can be divorced from the anecdotes, you know, because the anecdotes just supplement that evidence. They help put that evidence into context. And I'm so like fascinated by like the growing like scholarship around colorism, because I think it's about time people treat colorism with the same seriousness they treat racism.
Lamar, what are your thoughts?
When you come with statistics like that, that's the kind of supporting arguments that we need, as opposed to kind of moving away from the anecdotal, in my opinion, right? Because we're talking about something so big and so huge that affects everyone who is alive. I'm in the middle, you know, colorism exists for sure. I just think there's a lot of confirmation bias in our personal experiences that might drive us right to that term when it could be a number of other things.
But she's talking about how particularly darker-skinned women engage with structures, engage with power, engage with institutions. Per that exact point, there are continuing studies that show that in instances in which darker-skinned women do report intimate partner violence, domestic partner violence, bruises on their body, strangulation marks are harder for police to see, nurses to see, physicians to see, because a lot about how they are trained and the way they interact with those victims are attuned to look for those marks on lighter skin tones. And so that also impacts a lot in terms of who is seen as the victim, who gets resources, who gets proper medical attention. A lighter skinned woman who presents like I do, who walks in with something that reads very clean cut, is likely to get more attention in an already deeply misogynistic and racist and sexist body than a woman who is much darker than I am.
So they seem to have presented a lot of evidence and studies. Are you changing your mind at all?
As well as self-lived testimony, as well as anecdotal evidence. It goes back to how you feel about yourself.
I feel like it sounds like you're saying racism is like a choice almost.
How you respond to racism is, absolutely. And I know that that's uncomfortable, and I love it. This is my wheelhouse, trust me. How you respond to racism is a choice.
I'm hearing, particularly on this side of the room, this idea that you can make an individual choice outside of the context of history, culture, politics, structures. I don't believe that personally. I think when anybody buys a certain product, styles themselves a certain way, decides to not style themselves a certain way, read a certain book, use certain words in a job interview, approach a politician, I think all of that is informed by history literally all of the time.
Yeah.
We don't want to talk about anybody's individual experiences of it unless it's an experience that is affected by colorism in the way that you guys are comfortable with it. Colorism also happens on the other end. When I talk about the internalized racism and how lighter skinned voices, they don't get heard, they don't get pushed out there within the Black community, that I get eye rolls, I get, people, there's a reaction to that is very negative and not welcoming. And
I'm not in the business of denying people their lived experiences, like who am I? But I think we can also acknowledge that those things happen. Like lighter skinned people have like certain experiences where they feel invalidated because of their complexion. And we can also...
Can you acknowledge that colorism affects lighter skinned people?
There's no such thing as reverse colorism. Same way there's no such thing as reverse racism, reverse sexism, any reverse ism. That's what I believe.
Okay, that's your opinion. I respect it. That's
I
your opinion.
agree in the sense that the experiences you're talking about that circulate around like all this coded language of like you're not actually Black or you're not Black enough or like quantifying.
Which also happens with white people.
I
just
didn't
want to
finish
let that.
speaking.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to add to your point. Go ahead.
I have experienced versions of that myself, and I do not consider that to be colorism. Colorism is distinctly about a system and resources and visibility and autonomy within those systems.
Like, to add on what she said, like, about the whole bullying and things, like, that actually does happen. Like, I've been bullied just for, well, I consider myself as brown skin, but back then I was, like, really dark skin, and I did lighten up, like, probably 2 shades, maybe 3 shades because of it.
Can you tell me why you started to bleach your skin?
It's like you growing up in school, you have mainly guys making fun of your skin color and calling you charcoal, calling you dark. So growing up, you just start to feel like, oh, okay, no one likes me because of my skin color. Like, okay, I see. So that kind of does something to your head, you feel me? And also we have social media. They do praise lighter skinned women, Latinas, whatever, pale skinned women. So that kind of makes you feel like you're not desired, you feel me? So, and that's why I started bleaching my skin. That's why I started skin lightening because of it, And people that do buy my stuff, like, they do tell me that it's helping them feel more confident. And I know it's kind of sad, but it's like, that's the society we live in now.
So when you say when people buy your stuff, can you talk about your business and what it is that you sell?
I sell skin bleaching cream. Pretty controversial, I know, but I do have negative comments. People saying you hate yourself, you wish you were white, this and this and that, you're a follower, like, just a lot of stuff, but I don't really listen to it. I really don't care. I guess how society sees dark women, like we're basically the losing team. Like, who wants to be on the losing team? I felt like lighter skinned women, they were more desired and they get away with more and they have more privileges than I did. And also, I also thought that, personally, I looked prettier lighter. And for me, I honestly don't think it's a big deal because I feel like people want to be darker and people want to be lighter. So I don't see why it's such a taboo. I'm not ashamed of it because I kind of see the hypocrisy in it.
Being a lighter person, I do experience a tremendous amount of privilege, and I'm not denying that of you at all. I think what upset me about the skin bleaching is that a lot of mothers do it to their daughters, and from my own experience, sometimes your parents do it to you and you don't have the consent of the child, or someone like me could end up much lighter than I was in my childhood and kind of have an identity issue, and it's just, for me, it's a matter of consent.
And also, I feel like you have to ask yourself, what's the goal? The goal is to end colorism, racism. I feel like you changing your skin tone is just feeding into the cycle. And also, I think making money off of that is very kind of shady.
And some people just personally feel like they look better lighter, just like some people feel like they look better with makeup on. Why not you just tell everybody, love your natural skin, you don't need makeup.
Not being systemically oppressed from not wearing makeup, though. whereas someone with darker skin might experience systemic racism.
It's hypocrisy, though.
That's
what I'm trying to say.
Hypocrisy.
And that's not fair.
And I also don't think we can just ignore that there's such a terrible history of racism and colorism, and that's why it's a bigger deal to people when people are bleaching their skin versus when people are putting on makeup and yeah.
I think for me, when it comes to skin bleaching, I'm a lot less interested in the personal experience and more just like, why is this a multi-billion-dollar industry? Like,
Bingo.
why is
Bingo.
Dove, something in the US that, they just sell bar soaps here, but in Asia, they literally are selling skin bleaching, Asia and Africa, the Caribbean. Like, we need to talk about how this is like a capitalist enterprise that is invested in people lightening their skin.
That's
like,
disgusting.
that to me, like, I think that's why it's important to like remember like who benefits from people lightening their skin. Like, I think that the conversations, like we need to talk about class and capitalism along this as well.
So why does makeup get a pass when it's literally the same concept?
You're internalizing the idea that being lighter skinned is prettier, and I get why. Like, obviously, like I'm very privy to the societal pressures that would drive one to skin bleach, so I'm not trying to judge, but...
But you are, though. You are, though. But you are. And we just have to own that. Let's just own it.
I don't know how I'm judging. I literally acknowledge that. I understand why like skin bleaching is a thing. I have like a lot of family that skin bleaches. I'm not sitting here pretending like, oh, just love yourself, blah, 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 like, or even questioning that you like don't love yourself. Like I understand there are so many pressures that would make someone want to bleach their skin in the first place. I just think that it is a consequence of like internalized like anti-Blackness. Like you've internalized something, and it's not to say that it's your fault. It's just like we live in a world and we absorb the various messages, and we are all impressionable.
I don't have much to add, but I do think that what I would like for this conversation to do is less of focusing on like your personal experience of skin bleaching in the business and more of just like you as someone who like had a lived experience of being darker skinned, like you saw, and like you like had like the material experience of like receiving discrimination and like feeling less desirable, and like once your skin became lighter, like it opened up opportunities and doors for you. I think that that's what this conversation needs to focus on.
Yes.
Of just like actual, like that is a very clear experience and example of colorism. Like it is real, it happens.
When
like,
you're
I think
lighter, yeah, people treat you differently.
Like that's what I think this conversation really needs to center on. Why is it societally that being lighter skin has very clear material advantages of both beauty, desirability, romantic relationships, socioeconomic opportunities? Like, this is real.
Who here has had pressure from their mother or their family, or have heard those messages from within the household about colorism, and who wants to share that experience?
So I think one of the experiences of colorism that has stuck with me, and I know that like my mother, of course, like she said this offhandedly, but you know, as a child, like that's something that's rooted in you. But I remember one time and she was just like, you don't need to marry somebody that's like your shade or darker. Like your kids are gonna come out too dark. And I just remember being like, damn, like, is there something wrong with me?
Moving here after 9/11, there was a huge push, I think, in the Middle Eastern community to look as white as possible. So it wasn't necessarily that it was the beauty standard, but rather a way to not get hate crimed or to kind of stay under the radar. And so my mom would tell me things like, tell people you're Russian and things like that. So kind of like keeping a proximity to whiteness was seen as a safer idea.
Helen?
For me, in my family dynamic, it didn't come down to skin as so much as hair politics. So my hair, when I was a child, was very thick and straight, like a tapestry of hair. And then it got curly with puberty. And as my hair got curly, my mom, without discussion, stepped in with the executive decision that we would be straightening my hair. There was an assessment made on me as a child and then as a younger woman of like, oh, like you're almost there. Like if we can control your hair, if we can get your hair a certain texture, you could be mistaken for white. And that reflects well on us.
Anybody else want to share their experience of colorism from their families?
When I was younger, my little brothers were much like lighter than me. So I think at a very early age, I understood that society ascribed like lightness to like femininity and like darkness to masculinity. I think a lot of what I struggled with when I was younger was like blaming myself and like not like being confused as to why I was being treated differently. So when I was old enough to understand what colorism was and how many systems are at play, and that it really has nothing to do with me and everything to do with how people like are conditioned, I think it was liberating for me. That really helped me start thinking of myself as beautiful.
For me, many would probably assume that my parent like pushed it on me, but it's definitely the opposite. Like my mom, she always tells me that I'm beautiful. Like even when I was darker, like she always told me I was beautiful. She never said I had to use cream or use anything to lighten my skin. I just got influenced by the media, honestly.
Yeah, I have a similar experience. My mom, she really embraced my hair, told me it was beautiful, and encouraged me to grow it. But I just remember watching like TV, Disney Channel, and all of these things and asking, why can't my hair look like that? Why can't it be straight? So for me, it's the same. I saw it more through the media, but I was still getting that support from my family, that, you know, that encouragement.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. I think, you know, what's permeating for me is like information and accessibility to that. I grew up in the Bronx, so like people are around people that look like them for almost their whole lives, and so they don't, it's like so embedded that way. It's so embedded, like they stay in the projects forever. And, you know, I managed to leave, like I went out of the hood to get an education, and, you know, and I already didn't look like them because of my fair skin. I'll go back, and I've been having these conversations, these kind of like esoteric seeming conversations that people that I grew up with have never had before.
I think that's interesting. I'm sorry, I gotta be the odd man out again, I guess. What I'm hearing is that because you've had a different experience, you think that the people who stayed home, because people do stay home, they don't leave their hometowns, you think that they've been held back because of their race?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. No, that's not what I said. Racial experience will change depending on where you're located, I think, is all I'm saying. And so people might not have as much of an awareness of how they are different from others if they're in a homogeneous environment. So it isn't until they experience something different and are in an environment of diversity and of different experience that they see, oh wait, maybe I am of marginalized experience. And then they bring that back, and, you know, they can try and pretend like they never saw that, but, you know, and try and integrate back into their home life, but that's impossible. You can't unsee it.
So we've talked a lot about some of the systems that contribute to colorism, but let's talk about the media and the cultural aspect.
I noticed like there's like an oversaturation of like lighter skinned biracial women who are sort of like meant to be like the representatives of like blackness on TV. I also think representation definitely can't fix everything, right? But I think seeing more dark-skinned women in the media, like Lupita Nyong'o, who's just like gorgeous, I was like, well, if she's beautiful, it's like, why do I think like dark skin is ugly? And I think it becomes frustrating when you feel like you constantly have to wait for representation, like everyone will get representation before you.
And even when we are presented, we're presented as ghetto and loud and like we're not meant to be in a relationship. Like we always like stress our partner out. We're annoying. Like we complain a lot, and it just sucks. Like I was saying, like it does do something to your head. And I personally feel like Black women are at the bottom of the barrel. Like nobody wants Black women. Like nobody desires Black women. They basically think we're trash. And that gets to your head, especially when you have a whole bunch of, you know, even celebrities, like men, Black men, like wanting to be with white women or lighter skinned women. It makes you feel like you're just not wanted. And it makes you feel like you want to join the hype.
we have made a lot of progresses in the campaigns. You do see a wider range of shades, but why is that all of a sudden a trend? You know what I mean? I'm happy it's happening, but I feel like this is something that should have been happening, you know? And also, a lot of the time you can put these wide ranges of shades in front of the lens, but my question is, when I show up to set, what's the crew giving, you know? Where there are people of color helping formulate the formulas of the product, you know? It's so much deeper than just what you see in front of the lens.
I do worry sometimes, like Isaiah said, there will be, and again, I use this word very intentionally, moments, but it often gets translated back into the culture as a trend. Trends are not lasting, trends are not legislation, trends are not resources, trends are not restructuring of ideas and resources.
Let's bring it back to social media for a second. What do you think first when you hear the word cultural appropriation?
Cultural appropriation to me is not braids that are being stolen or something, or things that are, you know, people. If somebody can do braids and they want to do braids, they can do braids. That's not cultural appropriation to me. It might be cultural appreciation, and I think that that's something that is looked over a lot. I think that cultural appropriation comes in place where, like political parties will use struggles of Black people to get laws passed or something like that. That to me is cultural appropriation.
When it comes to cultural appropriation, the reason why, for example, indigenous peoples of the Americas don't want you wearing a headdress is because what has happened for the last 500 years, like literally acts of genocide, being put in boarding schools, like literally being killed and discriminated against and experiencing real harm for like being able to wear their cultural traditions. We're talking about the Black hair textures discrimination legally because it happens, because there are like, for example, schools, like workplaces, like various forms of employment that say that like you as a Black person having this Black hairstyle will not be accepted. Like, we're not okay with that. And so when I see a white girl wear Fulani braids or type of braids, whatever type of braids, I'm just like, you're never gonna experience in the way that like a Black person is for wearing their own cultural traditions, like real like socioeconomic discrimination. Like, I don't know. I just think that I'm over it.
I kind of wanted to touch on like the idea of cultural appreciation. And for me, I do love when people take certain aspects of my culture and when they credit it to mine. And I think oftentimes we can see on TikTok and other medias, like sometimes white people act like they thought of an idea that's like historically existed. And that to me is not appreciation anymore.
The line for me is just between appropriation and appreciation is benefiting. You know what I mean? If you do something that a culture has been teased about, put down about, and then you put it on now that it's a trend and you're benefiting from it, you're getting these followers, you're able to raise your prices because of that. All of these things are really detrimental and they're kind of heartless.
With these platforms that are new and are emerging, the same dynamics are mirrored back to us, whether that is racism, colorism, misogyny, Islamophobia. When we have new platforms like this, they are not bigger than these things. They do not exceed these things. They literally just mirror back these same realities, these same problems, these same dynamics.
If not amplify them.
And if you're looking for racism, you're going to find it. If you're looking for colorism, you're going to find it. And I think, and that's not, I'm not trying to negate anybody's lived experience, but I think that there's also a thing in life that if you're looking for something, you can speak it into existence.
Elmer? Yeah, so to speak to that, let's say me and Kelvin were in a group chat with a non-Black person and they sent a gift that could be considered a Black gift. I think it's, and I accuse them of digital blackface, but he doesn't. And so, pause it there because you guys were saying like, just because something's happening or like, if we have different feelings on it, whose point of view determines if something is actually happening or not, or if we're still in the realm of opinion and feeling?
I think as a non-Black person, if even one Black person told me something's not okay, I would listen to them. It could be 1 out of 100. I would really...
You don't think that's dangerous? I'm sorry to cut you off, but you don't think that's dangerous?
That's insane.
Because you're giving me the power to determine how you interact with
But it's
Black
really
people.
not that much power to not use a gift that's not meant for me.
Who said it's not meant for you? If we create content as Black people, we're not posting it on a website where only Black people can get into. We're sharing it with you. I think people get offended when you when people misuse the content that we have and abuse it. But I can't tell you what GIF. I mean, if it has the N-word in it real big, I'm gonna take offense to that. But you already knew that. You already knew that. But if it's like a niche, popular black person who does comedy and you post their GIF, I'm not gonna say, well, hey, slow down. Like I don't have that kind of power to tell someone that, and it's dangerous.
I feel like you're like devaluing people's like feelings. You know what I mean? It might not offend you, but let's say you're in a group chat and it bothered him. Why can't you just acknowledge that it bothers him and not you? You know what I mean? Some people have different feelings on different things.
Well, but here's the thing: simply disagreeing does not mean I'm not acknowledging your feelings.
Okay.
We can disagree because I'm sorry. I'll just finish real quick.
Yeah.
But you're saying that
the event
she shouldn't
of visual
say it's blackface
is determined by the viewer.
I think in general, like GIFs, like reaction memes, there's a sort of like flattening of people because it's like we only know that person in that context to make us laugh. But I think with like digital blackface or whatever you want to call it, there's the added like aspect of like historically black people being used as like comedic relief. Like whether if you think back to like actual blackface shows and like white people painting themselves like pitch black and like doing things that they think will make other people laugh, like different like black stereotypes. So I definitely think like there's an aspect to that.
Destiny, how about you? How social media affected your view of colorism?
Like with social media, light-skinned people are important and they're pretty and this and that. And that's the same thing I want to feel. So, and there's a lot of benefits that come along with it, and I want the same benefits. And I'm be honest, I want the same benefits. Like I don't care.
How do you feel hearing that, Maya?
Interesting, you asked me. First thing that came to mind was thinking about Lil' Kim and how like so many people in 2022 be like, oh, you look so good when you were darker skinned. I'm just like, but y'all treating her like shit. Sorry for cussing, but it's the truth. Like she literally said like, all the people I was dating would leave me for white European girls. Like y'all like talked about my nose, you talked about my featurism, and just she wanted an easier life. So I'm just like, I think about like, why are there so many material benefits to being lighter? Also, how do we make a world where darker skinned people don't have to do this, like don't have to? Like, I think that I'm interested in creating a world or like moving towards a world where we don't have like these very clear, like straight up pigmentocracy, like straight up like hierarchies of shade that are like rooted in anti-blackness, that like are influenced by white supremacy, all of these things like that are interconnected with one another.
I really feel like it's never gonna change. Like, we want it to change.
I want it to change.
We hope that it'll change, but is it really gonna change? I really don't think so.
What do you define as change?
Like, change as like...
You want people to...
It's fair game for also dark-skinned people. Like, we all are on an equal level. And I feel like that's never going to happen.
Let's talk about dating for a second. And has colorism affected your dating life, made it easier or harder?
I think often people push aside the conversations about like romantic relationships for darker skinned people and how limited and how isolating it feels to be darker skinned and experience people ridiculing you or saying purely like, I'm not interested in any darker skinned person, even though there's millions upon millions of people in this world who are dark. Like, making clearly those preferences. I think that we also need to like really, really sit and think about like, what does it mean or like to feel like you're going through an entire life without experiencing like the romantic care that, because we live under capitalism, often the care and like just feelings of love that we receive are regulated to romantic or familial relationships. I think that this is larger than just colorism. Like, what does it mean to not receive care because of how you look?
I can't go inside the head of every woman that I've ever encountered and determine if my color mattered or not. And even if they said it, it might not mean anything. It might not be true.
So it sounds like it hasn't affected, colorism specifically hasn't affected your dating life.
I can't say definitively because
is there anybody who can say colorism has it affected their dating? Go ahead.
Well, when I was a kid, no one like looked my way. I think it's also dependent on my features and the country I came from, but also I was many, many shades darker. And as I got older, I was more, I could say, palatable to the white man. The people that might come up to me at a bar feel more comfortable coming up to me rather than someone who might be a darker Middle Eastern person, and I've been told things like, oh, you're Middle Eastern? I thought you were white. Like, you're so pretty for Middle Eastern. And it's like, what? Like, that's such an odd thing to say to someone, but I have gotten that many times in my life when my skin tone changed.
So for me, it's reverse. In the gay world, it's different. White boys want the BBD. You know you know what I'm trying to say, and that's just a true phenomenon that we navigate. In that, if you're light skinned in the gay world, you're not sought after like you are as a darker male.
You're not sought after from white men
from white men, like
other black men.
Absolutely, because that's just they want the darker to bury the sweeter juice. Like that's what's sought after in the gay world, and that's specifically with white men. I haven't.
How do we feel when people talk about preferences? Somebody might say, I don't have anything against darker skinned women. I just prefer light skinned women. I just prefer to date them.
Like, I just really implore people to interrogate why they have certain preferences. Like, we don't live in the vacuum. We're all interacting with the forces at play all of the time. So we don't come and arrive to our preferences independent of racism and futurism and fat phobia and texturism. I think it's all connected. So I think that's what confuses me. And I think people are really dishonest about the facts. So I would just say, if you have a preference for lighter skin, that's colorism. It's literally colorism.
Well, because how do you determine why someone likes something? And so I want to ask you a question. So in the beginning, you said if you're
right.
choosing someone because of their color, you're discrimination. So if I say that I only date much darker women, is that a comment that warrants a deep dive in my head? Like, what do I have against light-skinned women? Or is it only in the reverse? And at what point is someone's preference up for debate?
If you have a preference for lighter-skinned women, and we're all agreeing, I think, that colorism exists, I don't understand how you could arrive to that preference independent of colorism, the system. I think more people prefer lighter-skinned women than darker-skinned women, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Who you date says a lot about who you will advocate for, who you trust, who you believe deserves support, who you're willing to show up for.
This is why I said desirability politics, because it is political. Because of who you deem as pretty goes into these other characteristics. Who you deem as ugly goes into these other negative characteristics. So it's yes, who you desire, who do you want to who you're attracted to goes beyond just romantic, intimate, sexual relationships. It also very much so blends into your platonic relationships as well, your relationships with your coworkers, all other elements of your life. I think that's why it's important to think about colorism as not just straightly around dating or just around preferences, but also just how do you treat the dark-skinned people in your life? I think everybody should ask themselves that. How many dark-skinned people are in your life or in your friend group? How do you treat darker-skinned people, individuals of all races? When you meet them on a day-to-day, what do your interactions look like? What are your thoughts about them?
The type of attention that I have received societally, professionally, and culturally is unlike anything that the darker women on my side of the family have experienced. It's very clear that when white people approach or engage with us or interact with us in any way, I am the one they feel comfortable talking to. I am the one that they want to take the order from. I am the one that they bring the bill to. I am the one that is deemed non-threatening. I am the one that is never loitering. I am the one that could never be doing anything wrong. And I feel for the darker women in my family, that's extremely painful.
Thank you for sharing that. So it's clear that, we obviously have different views on this topic. If we have so many people that are on different pages about this issue, how do we move forward as a society in changing it?
I personally feel that colorism is never going to end, honestly. But if I was to give a solution, I would say people should just, promote all skin tones and have everyone on at an equal level and not one higher than the other.
One solution or one kind of tiny bit into the solution would be just more media representation.
Yeah, I also think it starts, of course, in the home, the way you talk about it, but I think people that are in positions of power need to use their power, whether that be Black people or white people. Use that power to show darker-skinned people in the media. You know, we need to see more of it.
The first thing you want to do is accept yourself. And then I think you're a little bit better equipped to fight against these things.
I think I want to kind of empower folks who don't think that they can make a difference. Yeah, and encouraging people to be more critical about their proximity to whiteness and how they take up space is one where, like, at least at the local level, we can maybe start to see some shift and change.
Get out of your echo chambers. If you are around people who are saying the same things and they're thinking the same way that you are part of the problem.
I think that anything that we do to address or not address colorism will happen collectively and will happen across gender, across race, across class, across ability, and that purporting individual solutions is false and also very seductive.
Yeah, I would say I implore people to believe that change is possible on many fronts, like on an individual level, like changing internally how you feel about yourself, your self-esteem, and also on a systemic level, demanding that the systems serve people who historically have been antagonized by the system. I think those two things should not be divorced from each other.
In terms of solutions to colorism, I would like to see these conversations prioritize the voices of, like, not just darker-skinned people who have the lived experiences of colorism, but also, like, folks, or, like, usually it's darker-skinned people who've, like, done research and, like, have expertise on, like, understanding the system of dominance. Like, I think that I'm really, really tired of seeing lighter-skinned people, like, say the exact same things and parrot the voices of darker-skinned people and get claps and applause by darker-skinned people, received antagonism, you know, replicating colorism.
Okay. I want to thank you all for giving us your time today. I know it was got pretty intense at time. It's a difficult conversation, but it is an important one. I don't know if we changed any minds, but I definitely learned a lot from listening to you all today, and hopefully our audience will as well. So thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for facilitating. Are we free to move?
Wait, we still have the other talks.
Great job.
Thank you.
Great discussion, guys. I can't wait to watch it.
Well, where do we begin?
I actually think it went pretty well.
It makes the people uncomfortable, so I came what I did to do.
I thought some other parts were kind of reductive in some ways.
The panel got a little bit spicy.
And also the rawness, no fluff, you know, keeping it real.
I think it's impossible to talk about colorism and not get emotional.
I wish I didn't have to speak on colorism, but it affects too many people for me to be able to sleep well at night not to.
Definitely a layered topic.
I think that my face sometimes betrays me. I was laughing at some of the more absurd comments that were made during the panel.
Colorism is sad, but it's a society we live in now, so we can't really do anything about it.
We all have to believe that change is possible for change to happen.
Colorism sucks. It's real. That would be my final thought.